Okay, so we're doing take 2 of chapter 2, the perceptions chapter. Take 1, unfortunately, my computer crashed, so we're going to go ahead and get started with this. And here is the link. This link is also in your Canvas. It'll bring you right to this chapter 2 perception process. And we're going to go through this 2.1 and 2.2, and then I'll have a second one doing 2.3 and 2.4, but there's also a couple of videos in your Canvas that will go along with that. So now let's start with what is perception and why is it important? So perception is just, it's how we perceive people. It's the impressions we get on, mainly first meeting. So what kind of impressions do we form and why? What leads us to that certain point of thinking about someone in this way, shape, or form? And then, where do these come from? So like I just said, why do we form these impressions? Where do they come from? And kind of spoiler alert, they come from our past experiences with similar people or similar situations. They come from schemata or little schematics that we have in our head that we put things into, we put experiences into and put people into. So what is the actual process of perception? So we select information. So right now I can hear some sirens going on in the background. It's typically salient or important because typically if I hear sirens, I know I need to pull over and let this, ambulance or whatever pass me. It causes lots of stimulation because it is noisy. It's very loud. It's very high pitched. It's very, annoying to listen to. And it's typically interesting to people because we're like, oh, there's an emergency. I want to see what's going on because we have this natural curiosity. And typically, sirens are only used for emergencies, so it is typically unexpected, and therefore we pay attention to it. So selection can also be if something has a bright color like orange. You tend to focus on it. If something makes a loud noise or a bright light, if something is new that you've never seen before, maybe you really have a need of a certain thing, so you're really on the lookout. So your mind is primed to focus on that thing. Or if you're thinking about buying a new car, you are in need or interested in a new vehicle. So the ones that you like, you're bound to notice more. I remember when my mother was thinking about buying a Chevy Colorado. So every time we were on the road, we would both notice a whole bunch of Chevy Colorados. But since she's kind of moved off from that, I cannot tell you the last time I have noticed if a vehicle was a Chevy Colorado or not. And then after we select it, we organize it. So we sort these things that we have noticed into, we categorize them, into patterns. So things that have been familiar. We see this all the time. So apple is fruit. Apple goes in fruit salad. Tomato is technically also a fruit, but does not go into fruit salad. And then we interpret it based on these mental schemata. You can also think of it as kind of mental schematics based on other things that we have experienced, how we know other things work. Okay. So, what is your perception of this? So here in the Gila Valley, a lot of people probably know what these are because, they've been exposed to it. They know what a CTR ring is. But for someone who's not from here or who's not LDS, they're probably just gonna be like, oh, that, that's a really cute ring. I like the flowers. Or, why are you wearing a ring if you're not engaged or married, or insert whatever here. But for those of you who know what this is, it gives a certain impression of people. So here is just I think this is straight from the book, a little bit more detail in the perception process. So I'll give you guys a second to check that out. So, and that is basically what we're going to cover from that section 1. You're welcome to go back and, read that in the book and get some more details, but I just wanted to kind of hit the highlights because I'll probably throw in some other readings and videos for you guys to watch. So let's move on to part 2, which is perceiving others. So obviously we're not just perceiving the world around us like objects, we're also perceiving people. So when we perceive people, we can either give them internal like personality traits and attribute their actions to that, or we can attribute it to external factors. And that will color how we perceive them and how we feel about them. So there's these two things that are pretty big in attribution and perception of, ourself and of others, but we'll talk about perception of self later. You have the self-serving bias, which we use for ourselves. So when we have successes, we attribute it to our internal factors, our personality traits that are stable. So, like this example says, I got an A on that test, I'm so smart, versus, oh, well, I actually really, really had to study for that. It was difficult. It's like, nah, I must just be really smart because, studying would be external, that situational factor, which can change. But, if we're smart, that's more stable. And then we attribute our failures to external factors more beyond our control. I got a speeding ticket. That cop is, so mean, rather than, oh, I just happened to speed a lot and I finally got caught. So, and we do basically the opposite to other people. So if someone is rude to us, we attribute that to an internal personality trait. It's like, oh, well, they must just be, a rude person in general, rather than an external factor of maybe they just had a really, really bad morning. So we have to use this thing called cognitive complexity to find different answers for it. You can't assume that everyone is out to get you, or everyone is a negative Nancy, or everyone's, just rude, because life isn't going to be fun. You should live with the, I guess the interpretation of that people are generally good people. They're not, out to purposefully be rude. Yes, there are people in the world who are not nice people, but a great majority of people, they're not being rude to you just to be a butthead. Maybe don't realize they're being rude just because they had a really bad morning and are really trying hard to just get through the day without bursting into tears or, insert whatever here. So this cognitive complexity says to find multiple answers. So, oh, John was late today. So, John must have just been goofing off all morning and not care about work. Or maybe John had a flat tire on the way to work, or his, power went off last night, so his alarm was behind by 30 minutes or whatever, or insert whatever other thing could have happened. So it's not always internal factors that cause us to be good. It's not always internal factors that cause other people to be, quote unquote bad. So there's always external factors that contribute to our success and external factors that contribute to other people's, foul mood or bad behaviors. So impression management and first and last impressions, these are, very, very important. So we have something called the primacy effect and also the recency effect. So the primacy effect says that we place more value on the first information we receive about a person. And this kind of can also go into the halo effect or the horn effect as well. So which we're going to talk about next. But the first information we receive about a person, so maybe they were really, really nice to us because they were having a really, really good day. That's, we're going to remember that. We're going to say, okay, this person is a good person. And then the recency says we put more weight on our most recent impression of a person. So maybe they didn't have a super great first impression, but the last time we talked to them, they were super apologetic and super nice. So we might remember that more. I think it just depends on the context and the situation and what kind of relationship you're trying to build with that person. If you're trying to build, a positive relationship for the future with that person, whether it be a coworker, future in-law, romantic relationship, or just friend, you're probably going to want to do whichever one has the most positive impression, because if you're going to work with them, you probably want to like them. But we can definitely manage the way people feel about us. You can change the way you dress. So, if one of your professors comes in on the first day of class, with, rumpled hair and in PJs, that is definitely going to influence their perception or your perception of them. But they might be doing that on purpose just to kind of see how you react. There's definitely will be days when I might do that. People also judge you and perceive you and interpret how you are as a person based on, just physically how you look. And, unfortunately, it's just the way it is that people will judge you as more competent, more kind, if you have more symmetrical and more attractive facial features. That's not to say they're going to have a super negative impression of you if you happen to not have as a quote unquote traditionally attractive face, but you do have to work a little bit harder on getting that positive first impression if you are less conventionally attractive. And you can also influence people based on the material objects and people you have around. So if you are wearing a wedding ring, that is a material object that will influence someone's interpretation of you. It changes their interpretation from possibly, single and attractive to married and attractive and therefore unavailable. The people around you, if we look at this picture over here with Trump and Melania, I don't know who the rest of these other people are, but I'm going to assume they're governmental officials, military people. But this looks like a powerful group of people. Whether or not you agree with their politics or not, if you are in the presence of a world leader, you are typically seen as powerful, and therefore people will perceive you to have more power than the average Joe. Okay. And this halo and horns that I mentioned briefly a couple minutes ago, the halo effect is an initial positive perception that can lead us to view later interactions, even if they are more negative, as more positive. And, this can deal with attractiveness too. If someone is more attractive and is nice to you, you might put a halo around them. Or if you have, like this example, a friend works for a company that you're applying to and they've been talking you up to their bosses and stuff, even if you show up a couple minutes late, you've been talked up so much that they might just be like, I've heard a lot about you. It's all been good. So, traffic was really terrible today. I totally understand. But then there's the horn effect. So initial negative perceptions, which can lead to later negative interpretations of interactions, even if that person's been totally polite. So maybe they don't have someone at that company who hasn't talked them up, and traffic was really, really bad that day, even though they left, a couple minutes earlier than they needed to. They still arrive a little bit late. So that could color all those future interactions as negative, and maybe they don't get that job because they were late and didn't have anyone to vouch for them. And part of this too, it's just could be who you know. The thing with communication is there's so many variables because humans are so complex. We can't really attribute, a certain action to one certain instance where things went good or bad, because there are so many other things going on in people's lives. We could maybe make an educated guess, but it's hard to be 100% sure when dealing with humans and how they perceive certain things. And with that, culture definitely affects how we perceive basically everything. So, a couple interesting ones, are touch. Americans tend to be relatively touchy. It is definitely not acceptable in some other cultures to have as many, PDA moments as Americans do. When I was in Europe, very seldom did I see, people holding hands, kissing on public transport. But it's definitely something I have seen in the United States. Um, Taste, if you've been conditioned to like the taste of something. So one of my friends is from China, and he's always kind of thrown off when he has ginger in desserts, because here in the US we use a lot of ginger in dessert foods and sweet foods, but he always grew up putting ginger on his meat. So it was just, he would taste ginger and think, savory meat dish, but it would be, no, this is, like pie or something that has ginger in it. Um, Smell, this is a legitimate one too, because I have another friend from Europe who he doesn't really wear deodorant. He might wear a little bit of antiperspirant, but not ever deodorant. So he always just smells like him rather than, Axe body spray, which is probably for the best. Let's be honest. Um, but when we were in America, he would always get comments, from people or from my family when he'd be around them, or they'd comment to me, it's like, don't you think he smells? And it's like, he smells like him just because he doesn't smell like deodorant or whatever one's popular now doesn't mean he smells bad. It just means he smells different, that way, in a way we might not be used to. So, okay. And of course, culture also affects how we perceive other things rather than people. So how do we perceive marriage? So here in the US, people tend to marry for love. It would be very, very odd to find someone who had an arranged marriage or a business marriage. But that's, more common in other countries such as India. How do we view politics? Is it right for politicians to act this way or do these things? How do we view money? In some cultures, it's very, very taboo to talk about how much money you make. And then privacy. So this is an interesting one, especially with things that have been going on in the world recently. How do we view privacy? Americans very much value their privacy. Like they do. There aren't a lot of CCTVs. Here in the US, you might get some in bigger cities, but the average downtown in US does not have, a huge number of security cameras. But you go to, a downtown, a high street in, the UK, there are CCTV cameras everywhere, and they're constantly monitored, in case someone steals something or a fight breaks out. It's people are always being monitored, and that's normal, it's acceptable, people expect that. But here people aren't expecting to be watched while they're out in public, let alone recorded or being monitored live. So how the countries have developed has definitely shaped the perception on privacy. And that is our ending for parts 1, 2. We'll have 3 and 4 later. So if you have any questions, feel free to shoot me an email, ask me in class, ask me when you see me, and I will happily answer whatever questions you have. See ya. Thanks.